My sister-in-law told my 9-year-old daughter in front of the entire family dinner, "You're not even your father's real child." My daughter looked at me with tears and asked, "Is it true, Mama?" I held her hand and said nothing. The next week I walked into a DNA lab. When the results came back, it wasn't my daughter's paternity that shocked everyone. It was. The morning Kevin's thumbs up emoji came through at 5:22 a.m., I stood in the kitchen staring at it like it owed me something. One thumb. Pointed up. That was my husband's way of saying good morning, I love you, I'm alive out here in Oklahoma and don't worry about me. All packed into a single yellow icon the size of a pencil eraser. 3 years he'd been doing that. 3 years since phone calls turned into texts, texts turned into emojis, and emojis turned into whatever comes after you stop pretending the silence between you is comfortable. I set the phone face down on the counter and poured my coffee. The kitchen still smelled like the cinnamon candle Lily picked out at Dollar General last month. She'd stood in the seasonal aisle for 10 full minutes choosing between cinnamon and fresh linen, before deciding that cinnamon smelled like a house where people actually lived. She was 9. She shouldn't have been thinking about things like that. But Lily noticed everything, same as me, and I guess that's what happens when your daddy's gone 3 weeks out of 4. You start paying attention to what makes a place feel full when it isn't. I packed her lunch the way I always did. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, a folded note tucked between the napkin and the juice box. Today's said, "You're my favorite human." I'd been writing her those notes since kindergarten. Some mornings I'd sit there with the pen trying to think of something new, and some mornings the words just came out like breathing. This was a breathing morning. I checked the bus route sheet pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like Ohio, laced up my boots and headed out into the dark. My breath came out in white puffs. October in Brookville hits different than people expect. It's not postcard fall, it's gray sky, wet leaves, 41 degrees at dawn, and the kind of cold that finds the gap between your collar and your neck like it's looking for it. Lily slept another 40 minutes. Mrs. Perez from next door would walk her to the bus stop at 7:15. The same bus route I drove, just a different one. I'd tried to get assigned to Lily's route when she started 3rd grade, but the district said it was a conflict of interest. I thought that was funny. Conflict of interest. As if my whole life wasn't one long conflict of interest between what I wanted and what everybody else needed. After my morning route, I drove out to Doris's farmhouse to sort her medications. I'd been doing this since Earl died in 2019, blood pressure, cholesterol, and the anxiety pills she started when the grief hit her sideways about 6 months after the funeral. The kind of grief that doesn't show up at the service but finds you on a Tuesday in April when you open the closet and his work boots are still there. I understood that. I'd lost both my parents by 19, so I knew something about the way loss sneaks up on you when you think you've already handled it. Doris thanked me for the refills the way she always did, politely, carefully, like she was keeping score of favors she'd eventually have to repay or hold against me. She asked about Lily's grades. I told her Lily got a 98 on her spelling test. Doris nodded and said, "Good. Smart girl." Then, almost as an afterthought, stirring her tea without looking up, "Courtney's bringing Bryce by this weekend. That boy's getting so tall." Spitting image of his grandfather. I glanced at the framed photo of Earl on the mantel. Broad shoulders, square jaw, dark wavy hair combed back the way men used to do it. I'd seen that photo 100 times. I didn't linger on it. I was too busy doing the math on whether the $47 copay for Doris's prescriptions would clear before Friday's direct deposit, because the checking account had $212 in it and the electric bill was due Thursday. That afternoon I sat at my desk at Gary's Plumbing Company in Dayton, processing invoices for $14 an hour and thought about numbers. Not Gary's numbers. Mine. The $2,200 mortgage that Kevin's pipeline check barely covered. The cosign from Doris that made the house possible in the first place, which meant I owed her something I could never fully name. The fact that I hadn't bought myself new shoes in over a year, and the ones I was wearing had a crack in the left sole that let water in when it rained. I texted Kevin a photo of Lily's spelling test. A heart emoji came back 40 minutes later. I stared at that little red heart on the screen and tried to remember the last time he'd called just to hear my voice. Not to coordinate a bill. Not to check a schedule. Just to say, "Hey, I was thinking about you." I couldn't place it. I closed the phone and went back to the invoices. Saturday was Doris's birthday. Courtney pulled up to the farmhouse in her Yukon Denali like she was arriving at a gala. Full makeup, blown-out hair, and that energy she carried where every room she walked into immediately became about her. Bryce was behind her in a Bengals hoodie, slouching the way 14-year-olds do when they've been dragged somewhere they don't want to be. Dale stayed in the car on a dealership call. Of course he did. Courtney air-kissed Doris and then turned to me with that smile, the one that looked friendly if you weren't paying attention. "You look tired, hon. Kevin not helping out enough?" "I'm fine, thanks." Lily ran over to hug Bryce, and he tolerated it with the stiff patience of a kid who thinks he's too old for affection but secretly doesn't mind. I watched them standing together near the mantel, and that's when it happened, this quick, strange flicker in my brain. Bryce next to Earl's photo. Same jawline. Same way of shoving his hands in his pockets, thumbs out. Same slight forward lean. I blinked and Courtney's voice cut through. "She ever gonna grow into those curls? They sure don't come from the Whalen side." My smile tightened. Doris changed the subject to pie. Nobody else said a word. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was doing that thing old houses do, settling, ticking, breathing like it's alive, I sat at the kitchen table with chamomile tea and did what I always do when something sits wrong. I made a list. Not on paper. In my head. Courtney's comments about Lily's appearance. 3 times in 2 months. The not a real Whalen joke at the Labor Day cookout. The hair remark today. And something else harder to pin down. A stiffness between Doris and Courtney that I'd noticed only after Earl died. Like they were circling each other. Like they shared something that took effort to carry. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the old photos Kevin had texted last Christmas. The Whalen kids as teenagers, Earl in his work boots by the barn, the farmhouse in August with the corn shoulder high behind it. I stopped on one of Earl at about 40. The dark wavy hair. The jaw. That way he stood, solid and tilted forward like he was always about to walk toward something. I looked toward Lily's bedroom. Looked back at the photo. I put the phone down. Washed my mug. Told myself I was being ridiculous. But I didn't delete the photo from my recent screen. And I couldn't tell you exactly why. Have you ever noticed something about your family that everyone else seemed to ignore? Subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. 3 weeks I sat with that photo on my recent screen. 3 weeks of swiping past it every time I checked the weather or texted Kevin's thumbs up back with a smiley face I didn't mean. And in those 3 weeks I talked myself out of it at least a dozen times. Told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself Courtney was just mean and Bryce was just a kid who happened to stand a certain way. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around I'd almost convinced myself. Almost. Kevin came home 2 days early. Pulled into the driveway Tuesday night with his duffel bag and a gas station bouquet of carnations that were already wilting. He looked tired. Pipeline tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and doesn't wash off in the shower. But he was here and Lily launched herself off the porch steps and into his arms before he'd even closed the truck door. And for about 15 seconds, standing in the cold with the porch light throwing shadows across the yard, we looked like the family I wanted us to be. I spent all day Wednesday cooking. Sweet potato casserole with the brown sugar crust. Pecan pie from Earl's mother's recipe. The one Doris had given me the first year I married Kevin. Written on a stained index card in handwriting so tight it looked like code. I'd been making that pie for 12 Thanksgivings and every year Doris tasted it and said, "Not bad," which in Doris language was practically a standing ovation. The house smelled like sage and butter and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Kevin was home. Lily was vibrating with excitement. For one Wednesday afternoon, the numbers in my checking account and the emoji texts and the silence between us didn't matter. I let myself believe in the day. We pulled up to the farmhouse at noon on Thursday. Courtney's Yukon was already in the driveway, parked at an angle like she owned the property line. Inside she was commanding the stove, her apron tied over a silk blouse, directing Doris's church friend Marla on the green beans like she was running a field operation. Dale was in the living room, beer in hand, pretending to watch football but really scrolling his phone. Bryce was in the corner, headphones in, existing in that parallel universe teenagers build around themselves. Doris hugged Kevin long and hard, the way she always did, like she was pulling him back from somewhere far away. He gave me a nod. One nod. After 12 years and 100 prescription runs and every holiday meal I'd ever helped clean up, I still got the nod. 16 people. 2 tables pushed together with a tablecloth that didn't quite cover the seam. Kevin's Uncle Ray, 3 cousins from the Springfield side, Marla, and a handful of others who came every year and knew exactly where to sit. I set my casserole on the counter and noticed the wine glass in Courtney's hand. Riesling. And it wasn't her first pour. I could tell by the way she was holding it, loose at the stem, gesturing wider than the story required. It was 1:30 in the afternoon. The first hour passed the way Wayland Thanksgivings always do, loud, overlapping, smelling like gravy and old wood. Lily helped set the table, counting out forks with the seriousness of a surgeon laying out instruments. I was watching her when I caught Courtney watching her too, and the expression on Courtney's face stopped me mid-step. It wasn't hatred. It was something more specific than that. The look of a woman staring at evidence of something she needed to not be true. During appetizers, Courtney picked up a cracker, looked at Lily and said, "Girl, you are so tan for November. Where'd you get that complexion?" She laughed. Nobody laughed with her. Kevin shot her a look across the table, not sharp enough, not fast enough, and said nothing. Dale didn't even glance up. I swallowed it the way I'd been swallowing Courtney's comments for years. Sip of water. Redirect. I asked Uncle Ray about his knee surgery and let his answer fill the space where my anger should have been. But something was tightening inside me. A wire strung between my ribs that I didn't know existed until right then, and it was pulling tighter with every minute Courtney kept looking at my daughter like she was a problem that needed solving. Doris said grace. She mentioned Earl, she always did, her voice going soft and reverent on his name like she was polishing something sacred. She mentioned gratitude. She mentioned family. We all said amen. Lily sat between me and Kevin, cutting her turkey into precise little squares, arranging them in rows on her plate. Courtney was on her second glass, maybe her third. Her voice had that loosened quality, pitched higher, taking up more room than it earned. She was telling a story about Bryce's football tryouts, how the coach said he had natural ability, real raw talent. When she stopped mid-sentence. Just stopped. Her eyes landed on Lily like a searchlight finding its target. "Sweetheart," Courtney said, and her voice was clear now, cut glass clear, the wine burning off into something deliberate. "Has your mama ever told you why you don't look like your daddy?" She paused. Every fork at that table froze. "Because you're not really his. And everybody sitting here knows it." The sound Lily's fork made when it hit the plate, that thin metallic clatter against Doris's good china. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. It wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Lily turned to me. Her eyes were already full, the tears pooling but not falling yet, her chin doing that thing it does when she's trying to be brave and failing. "Is it true, Mama?" I took her hand under the table. I held it tight. I looked at Kevin. Kevin was staring at his plate like if he looked hard enough he could fall into it and disappear. He said nothing. Doris broke the silence with, "Courtney, that's enough." But her voice was papier-mâché, shaped like authority but hollow inside, crumbling at the edges. Uncle Ray said Jesus Christ under his breath and pushed back from the table. Dale looked around the room like a man trying to figure out what movie he'd wandered into. I stood up. Foley. I lifted Lily out of her chair, 58 pounds of her, all arms and legs and shaking, and carried her down the hallway to the bathroom. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub and held her while she sobbed into my collarbone. "Mama, why did she say that? Am I not Daddy's?" I held her face in both hands. "You are mine. You have always been mine. And I will make sure nobody ever makes you feel this way again." I meant every word. And I didn't say the other thing. The thing lodged in my throat like a bone I couldn't swallow. That her father had sat 4 feet away and watched his sister blow a hole through his daughter's chest and hadn't opened his mouth. Kevin drove us home in silence. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, one hand gripping her seatbelt strap. I carried her inside, tucked her in, and sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing settled into sleep. Then I walked to the kitchen. Kevin was standing at the counter, both hands flat on the surface, staring at the backsplash like it held instructions. "Why didn't you say something?" I froze. You froze. I didn't know what to say, Tam. How about, "That's my daughter, shut your mouth"? How about that, Kevin? He still wouldn't look at me. "I'll talk to Courtney." "No. You won't. Because you've been not talking to Courtney about this for months and she's only gotten louder. Something else is going on in that family, Kevin. And you're either too blind to see it or too scared to look." I walked to the bedroom and closed the door. The sheets were cold. The ceiling was dark. Outside, a train horn sounded somewhere near Brookville, long and low and going somewhere I wasn't. I lay there with my eyes open until the sky turned gray, And by morning I'd made a decision I hadn't made with my head. I'd made it with every cell in my body that had ever held that little girl and told her she was safe. That decision was still sitting in my chest when the alarm went off at 5:15. I hadn't slept, not really. I drifted in and out of something that wasn't rest, just my body shutting down in shifts while my brain kept running the same footage on a loop. Courtney's voice. Lily's face. Kevin's plate. By the time the sky turned from black to that washed-out gray that passes for dawn in late November Ohio, I knew what I was going to do. I just didn't have the words for why yet. Lily didn't want to go to school. She sat at the kitchen table pushing Cheerios around her bowl with a spoon, not eating, not looking up. She was wearing the purple shirt she always picked on days she felt brave, but nothing about her looked brave that morning. "Mama," she said, barely above a whisper, "kids at school are gonna know." I crouched down until we were eye to eye. "Nobody knows anything, baby. And anybody who has something to say can say it to me first. You hear me?" She nodded, but the nod was small, automatic. The way you agree with something because fighting takes more energy than you've got. I drove her to school and watched her walk through the front doors, her backpack riding low on her shoulders like she was carrying bricks instead of folders and a pencil case. I sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. I wasn't crying. I was past that. I was somewhere on the other side of tears, in the dry, flat place where the only thing left is motion. So I moved. The walk-in DNA testing clinic on Salem Avenue in Dayton was in a strip mall between a phone repair shop and a place that did immigration photos. The waiting room had 4 plastic chairs, a water cooler with no cups, and a poster about paternity rights that looked like it had been printed in 2006. I brought everything in a canvas grocery bag. A swab kit for myself. The coffee cup Kevin had used that morning, sealed in a Ziploc while he was in the shower. Lily's hairbrush from the bathroom, 3 or 4 strands still caught in the bristles. And one more thing. A crumpled Band-Aid I'd pulled from the wastebasket in the Whalen farmhouse bathroom on Thanksgiving night, while Lily sobbed in my arms on the edge of the tub. Bryce had nicked his finger helping carve the turkey. I don't know what made me take it. I can't give you a logical explanation. It was the jawline. It was the posture. It was Doris saying spitting image of his grandfather in a voice that carried too much weight for a casual observation. Something in me reached for that Band-Aid the way you reach for a handrail when the floor shifts. Instinct, not reason. Sandra, the technician, had reading glasses on, a beaded chain, and the steady hands of a woman who'd seen every kind of family secret walk through that door. She took my samples without commentary. I told her I wanted paternity confirmation for Lily and Kevin, and a secondary comparison between Bryce's sample and the Whalen paternal markers. She looked at me sideways, just a flicker, then wrote it down. $340 for the expanded panel. Results in 10 to 14 business days. I paid with my debit card linked to the savings account at Wright Pat Credit Union. $1,200 in that account, built up dollar by dollar since 2021. Now $860. I drove home, hid the receipt in the tampon box under the bathroom sink, the one place in the house Kevin has never once opened, and made spaghetti for dinner. Kevin called that night from Oklahoma. His voice had that careful tone he uses when he thinks he's solved something. I talked to Courtney. He says she was just joking. Didn't mean anything by it. She's sorry if it came across wrong. I held the phone away from my face for 3 seconds. When I brought it back, my voice was flat. A joke. She said it came out wrong, Tam. Your sister looked my daughter in the face at Thanksgiving dinner and told her she wasn't yours. And you're telling me it came out wrong. Silence. Then, I'll handle it. You keep saying that. More silence. I hung up, washed the spaghetti pot, and stood at the sink looking out the window at nothing. The next week moved like something underwater. Doris called on Monday, not to apologize. To manage. I hope you're not going to blow this out of proportion tomorrow. Courtney runs her mouth. You know that. But she's family. I held the phone against my ear and said, so is Lily. For seconds of silence. 4 full seconds. Then Doris said, of course she is. But it was the pause I heard. That pause said everything Doris's words were built to hide. Uncle Ray texted Kevin. Asterisk, your sister was out of line. Just so you know. Asterisk, but he didn't text me. He didn't say it at the table. He didn't say it where it mattered. And then Thursday, Lily came home from school with a worksheet, a family tree assignment. She'd drawn the branches in green crayon, filled in my name, her name, Grandma Doris, Aunt Courtney. The branch for father was blank. Just a line with nothing written on it. She set it on the kitchen table and said, "I didn't know what to put." I stared at that blank branch for a long time after she went to bed. Something inside me that I'd been holding in place for 10 years, held with routine and coffee at 5:15 and lunchbox notes, and the quiet belief that if I just kept giving enough, this family would hold. That thing cracked. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a slow, deep split like ice breaking on a pond in March. I went back to Doris's farmhouse that Saturday. Not because I wanted to, because her blood pressure medication doesn't care about my feelings and skipping it would make me something I refused to be. I sorted the pill organizer in the kitchen while Doris watched a rerun in the living room. On my way out, I stopped in the hallway. The family photos. I'd walked past them 100 times. Now I stood there and really looked. Earl at 40, dark hair, jaw like a squared-off stone. Earl at 50, grayer, thicker, same stance. And there on the fridge, held up by a magnet from Dale's dealership, Bryce's school portrait from last year. I looked at Earl. I looked at Bryce. I looked at Earl again. "You okay in there?" Doris called from the living room. "Just admiring the photos, Miss Doris." I kept my voice light. Almost casual. Then, like I was commenting on the weather, "Bryce sure does look like his grandpa, doesn't he?" Nothing. No response. Just the sound of the television volume going up 2 clicks. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel, hands at 10 and 2, pulse knocking in my wrists. I had just kicked a wall in that hallway. And the wall was hollow. The bottom came on a Wednesday at 2 a.m. Lily crawled into my bed, shaking, pressing her face into my shoulder. "Mama, I dreamed I didn't belong anywhere." I wrapped myself around her and stared at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the furnace cycling on and the wind finding the gap under the back door. I thought about what my life looked like from any angle you chose. A woman whose husband communicates in emojis, whose in-laws tolerate her like furniture, whose daughter is lying here doubting her own blood because a drunk woman said something cruel at a dinner table and not one person in that family stood up. I thought about my mother. Dead at 53. Gone before any of this. She would have known what to do. She would have had the words and the spine and the kind of anger that builds things instead of breaking them. But she was gone and I was here, alone in a house I could barely afford, holding a child who'd stopped trusting the ground beneath her, waiting for lab results that might prove nothing or might crack this family open like an egg. I buried my face in Lily's hair and cried. Not the polite kind. Not the kind you can pass off as allergies. The kind that starts in your gut and comes up like something you've been swallowing for years. Have you ever been the one holding everything together while the people who should have had your back just watched? Tell me your story in the comments. The crying stopped sometime before dawn. Not because the pain did, but because my body ran out of whatever fuel keeps that kind of grief burning. Lily was still curled against me, breathing slow, her fist wrapped around the collar of my t-shirt like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. I lay there watching the ceiling lighten from black to charcoal to the pale nothing color of early December in Ohio, and somewhere in that shift, somewhere between the last sob and the first light, something changed. Not a big dramatic moment. More like a click. A lock turning. The woman who'd been drowning for 2 weeks touched the bottom with her feet, and the bottom was solid. The envelope from the DNA lab arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white. Return address in Dayton. No special markings. Nothing to announce that it carried the kind of information that could dismantle a family. Lily was at school. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I'd poured but never touched and opened it with a butter knife because my hands were too steady for drama and I couldn't find the letter opener. Page 1. Paternity results. Kevin James Whalen is not excluded as the biological father of Lily Marie Whalen. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. I read it twice. Set it down. Picked it up. Read it a third time. I'd known. Of course I'd known. I'd been faithful to that man for 12 years, and there was never a question in my mind. But seeing it printed on lab paper in language so clinical it could have been a blood sugar report, made something unlock in my chest that Courtney had bolted shut at that dinner table. My daughter is a Whalen. End of discussion. Page 2. I almost didn't turn to it. Almost stopped right there, took my proof and called it a day. But I'd paid $340 to know and I was going to know. The secondary comparison, Bryce's Band-Aid sample measured against Kevin's paternal markers. I read the summary line 3 times because the first 2 times, the words arranged themselves in an order my brain refused to accept. Bryce Mitchell shares a direct paternal lineage consistent with first-degree relation to the Whalen male line. I put the paper down, picked it back up. The room was very quiet. The furnace wasn't running. The fridge hummed. Bryce's biological father was a Whalen. Not Dale. The only Whalen men who could have fathered a child born in August 2011 were Kevin and Earl. Kevin was working a pipeline in North Dakota that entire spring. I had the pay stubs to prove it. Which left Earl, 61 years old, Courtney's father-in-law. I set the report on the table, walked to the bathroom, dropped to my knees in front of the toilet, and threw up until there was nothing left but the taste of coffee and stomach acid. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day, not the next. For 3 days I moved through my routines. Bus route, Lily's homework, spaghetti, dishes, while something new assembled itself inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Cold, architectural clarity. The kind that builds spreadsheets and timelines instead of breaking dishes. After Lily went to bed each night, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started mapping it. Courtney married Dale in April 2009. Bryce born August 2011. That put conception around November 2010. Earl was alive, 60, still strong. The man chopped his own firewood until the year he died. Courtney was 26. I went to the closet and pulled down the shoebox of old photos Kevin kept on the top shelf. Holidays. Cookouts. Kevin's uncle's retirement. I flipped through them one at a time, looking for something I couldn't name until I found it. July 2010. A Whalen family reunion at Indian Lake Campground. Kevin and his cousins mugging for the camera in the foreground. But in the background, slightly out of focus, Courtney and Earl standing at the tree line. His hand on the small of her back. Her shoulder tilted into his chest. Everyone else was facing the lens. They were facing each other. I stared at that photo until my coffee went cold. Then I put it in a folder with the DNA results and slid the folder into the filing cabinet where I keep our tax returns. Saturday morning I drove to Springfield. Aunt Ruthie, Earl's sister, 82, living in a memory care place off Route 68 that smelled like industrial lavender and reheated soup. I brought sugar cookies from the bakery on Yellow Springs Street and signed in at the front desk. Ruthie was in the sunroom, sitting in a wheelchair by the window watching birds at a feeder like it was the most important thing happening in the world. Her mind came and went. She'd forget what she had for breakfast but could describe her wedding dress from 1962 down to the buttons. I sat beside her, broke a cookie in half and started easy. Aunt Ruthie, do you remember Courtney? Kevin's sister. Ruthie's eyes changed. Focused. Like a flashlight with a dying battery that suddenly catches. Courtney. Yes. Pretty girl. She picked at her cookie. Earl liked her too much. My pulse jumped but I kept my voice conversational, the way you talk about the weather or grocery prices. Too much how, Aunt Ruthie? She looked out the window. A cardinal landed on the feeder. Doris called me one night. Crying. Said she found them in the barn. She said it the way you'd say she found them playing cards. Flat. Matter of fact. Said Earl swore it was nothing. But Doris knew. She always knew. Ruthie turned to me. She told me she'd rather die than let the church find out. Then she drifted. Started telling me about a calico cat she'd had in 1987, how it used to sleep on the porch railing. I sat with her for another 20 minutes, nodding, breaking cookies, saying nothing. I had everything I needed. Doris knew. She'd known for years. And when Courtney detonated that accusation at Thanksgiving dinner, Doris didn't stop it. Because a lie about Tammy's faithfulness was so much easier to maintain than the truth about her dead husband and her own daughter. The anger found me on a Monday. I was driving my bus route, 8 kids on board, 2 stops left, and I was thinking about Doris in that armchair. Doris watching reruns while her granddaughter sobbed behind a locked bathroom door. Doris choosing Earl's reputation over Lily's sense of self. Doris turning up the television volume when I mentioned the resemblance, because silence was the only tool she had left. I pulled the bus to the shoulder at the next stop sign and gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. 3 breaths. 4. I finished the route, dropped every kid at their stop with a smile, parked the bus at the depot and drove home. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote 3 letters by hand on lined notebook paper. 1 to Kevin. One to Dale. One to Courtney. I didn't mail them. I read them every night for 4 nights, editing a word here, tightening a sentence there. Cutting anything that sounded like rage. I wasn't interested in rage. Rage is sloppy. I wanted precision. By Thursday the letters were right. I drove to the office depot on Wilmington Pike, made 3 copies of the DNA report and the Indian Lake photo, and sealed everything into manila envelopes. I addressed each one in my best handwriting, the same neat, careful letters I use on Lily's lunchbox notes. But before I mailed a single thing, I drove downtown to the Montgomery County Recorder's office and pulled 2 documents. Bryce's birth certificate, father listed as Dale Mitchell, and Courtney and Dale's marriage license, April 2009. I photographed both with my phone. Then I sat in my car in the county parking garage, engine off, and pulled up Earl Whalen's obituary on the Dayton Daily News website. A devoted husband, a loving father, and the rock of the Whalen family. I read it once. Read it again. And then I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the gap between those words and the truth was so wide you could lose a whole family in it. I started the car, drove to the post office on Main Street and handed the clerk 3 envelopes. Priority mail. Tracking numbers. I watched her stamp each one and slide them into the outgoing bin. I stood there until they disappeared behind the counter. Then I drove to Lily's school, signed her out 15 minutes early, and took her to the Dairy Queen on 725. "What's the occasion, Mama?" she asked, chocolate shake already on her upper lip. "No occasion, baby. Just felt like a milkshake kind of day." Lily had chocolate on her chin the whole drive home and didn't care. She sang along to the radio, some pop song I didn't know the words to, and for 10 minutes on Route 725 she was just a kid again. Not a kid carrying a question she was too young to carry. Just a girl with a milkshake and a song and her mama driving. I watched her in the rearview mirror and thought about the 3 envelopes sitting in a USPS sorting facility somewhere between Brookville and the rest of our lives. Priority mail. Tracking numbers. No taking them back now. I checked the tracking obsessively. I'm not proud of that, but I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Tuesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday night. Refreshing the USPS page on my phone like it was a heartbeat monitor. Kevin's envelope showed delivered first Thursday at 11:47 a.m., signed for at the pipeline office in Tulsa. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the screen and tried to picture the exact moment he opened it. I didn't have to picture it for long. My phone rang at 12:22. Kevin's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. "Tam." His voice was stripped down to the studs. No warmth, no anger, just a man standing in the wreckage of something he didn't know existed until 35 minutes ago. "Yeah. I'm coming home." He didn't say anything else. I heard the click of the line and then nothing. I found out later he'd read the report sitting on a metal folding chair in the modular office trailer at the pipeline site. Fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of diesel and scorched coffee grounds, 2 other guys eating lunch 15 feet away. He read it once. Twice. A 3rd time. Then he stood up, told his foreman it was a family emergency, grabbed his keys and got in the truck. 9 hours. Tulsa to Brookville. He didn't stop except for gas outside Springfield, Missouri, and once at a rest stop near Indianapolis where he sat in the parking lot for 6 minutes with the engine running, trying to decide whether to call his mother. He didn't call. He pulled into our driveway at 4:15 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, just the stove light on, casting that yellow glow that makes everything look like an old photograph. I'd been up since midnight. I heard the truck door. I heard his boots on the porch steps. I opened the front door before he could knock. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the kitchen, sat down in his chair, the one closest to the window, the one where he'd eaten 1,000 dinners and opened 1,000 beers and never once asked me the right question, and he put his face in his hands. He cried for a long time. Not quiet tears. The kind that move furniture. His shoulders shook and the chair legs rattled against the linoleum, and I stood by the counter and let him have it because this wasn't mine to interrupt. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were swollen nearly shut and his voice sounded like gravel dragged over concrete. "Lily's mine." "Yes." "Bryce is my dad's." "Yes." "My mother knew." "Yes, Kevin. She knew the whole time." He stared at the table like he was looking for something carved into the wood. Then he said, "How long have you known?" And I told him. "All of it. The Band-Aid." The clinic. Aunt Ruthie. The photo from Indian Lake. He listened without interrupting, which was maybe the first time in our marriage he'd done that. Dale's envelope landed Friday morning. I know because he called me at 10:33 a.m., 45 minutes after tracking confirmed delivery. His voice came through the phone like it was traveling from the bottom of a lake. Flat. Waterlogged. Is this real? I told him it was. Certified lab. Documented chain of custody. Silence so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, I raised that boy for 14 years. I know, Dale. He's not mine. I know. And I'm sorry you're finding out this way. He hung up without goodbye. I heard the rest secondhand weeks later, through Dale's cousin who worked at the Tractor Supply in Englewood. Dale drove home from the dealership in the middle of the day, sat down at the kitchen island across from Courtney, and spread the papers between them like a hand of cards he'd already lost. Courtney denied it. Said I'd fabricated the test. Said it was revenge for Thanksgiving. Said I was crazy, vindictive, obsessed. Then Dale slid the photo across the counter. Earl at 40 next to Bryce at 14. Same eyes. Same jaw. Same hands, down to the way the thumbs curved outward. Courtney went quiet. 15 minutes of nothing. Then, barely above a whisper, "It was one time." Dale looked at her and said, "He was your father-in-law." Then he stood up and walked out of the house. He didn't come back that night. The Whalen family came apart over the next 72 hours, and it happened the way old structures fail. Not with one big crack but with 100 small ones that had been there all along finally giving way at once. Kevin drove to the farmhouse Saturday morning and confronted Doris. I wasn't there, but the neighbors, a retired couple named the Hardings, 3 acres east, told me later they could hear Kevin yelling, and Kevin Whalen had never raised his voice in his life. Not at football games. Not at bars. Not once. 2 hours behind that closed door, and what came out was this. Doris found out about Earl and Courtney in 2010. Before Bryce was born. She confronted Earl, who swore it was over, begged her to stay, promised it was a one-time mistake. When Bryce arrived and the resemblance sharpened year by year, Doris made her choice. Protect the name. Protect Earl's standing at Brookville Baptist Church. Protect the image of a family that the whole community respected. And the easiest way to do that was to point every question about paternity at me, the woman who married in from nowhere, whose parents were dead, who had nobody to defend her. Doris had been whispering to Courtney for years. Planting seeds. Lily doesn't look like a Whalen, does she? Those curls aren't from our side. Feeding Courtney's insecurity until it became a weapon Courtney aimed at a 9-year-old girl over Thanksgiving turkey. Kevin came back to our kitchen that evening looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 8 hours. He sat across from me and said the thing I'd needed to hear since the day I married him. I should have stood up for you. Every dinner. Every cookout. Every time Courtney said something sideways and I pretended I didn't hear it. I should have been in your corner and I wasn't, and I don't have a good reason for that. I didn't cry. I just nodded. I know. I'm quitting the pipeline. Kevin. I'm not asking, Tam. I've been disappearing into those job sites for years because it was easier than sitting in this kitchen and facing what my family was doing to you. You were fighting something I didn't even see. I'm done being gone. We sat there for a long time after that. The stove light humming. The furnace clicking on. Outside, nothing, just dark Ohio fields and cold December silence. But it was a different kind of quiet than what I'd been living in. This was the silence of 2 people looking at the same broken thing and agreeing without saying it, that some pieces were still worth picking up. Christmas morning, Lily opened her presents on the living room floor while Kevin made pancakes, burned the first batch, nailed the second. No farmhouse. No Doris. No 16 people around pushed-together tables. Just us 3 and a roast chicken I made that afternoon with mashed potatoes and green beans from a can, because some things don't need to be fancy to be exactly right. Lily asked once, around noon, "Are we going to Grandma Doris's?" Kevin said, "Not this year, Lil." She thought about it for half a second. "Hey, can I have more potatoes?" That night, dishes done, Lily asleep with her new stuffed dog tucked under her arm, I sat on the back porch in my coat with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. The sky was black and clear, the kind of December sky where you can see every star Ohio has to offer. Kevin came out and stood next to me. Not touching. Just there. "She's gonna be okay, right?" he asked. I looked out at the fields. At the dark line of trees. At the sky full of cold, steady light. Yeah. He's gonna be okay. Because she's got two parents who finally stopped pretending everything was fine. Did Tammy go too far with those envelopes, or was every person in that family long overdue for the truth? Hit subscribe and tell me what you think below. We stood on that porch for a long time after I said it. Long enough for the coffee to go completely cold in my hands, long enough for the stars to shift in ways I couldn't track but could feel. Kevin didn't reach for me. I didn't reach for him. We just stood there, two people breathing the same frozen air, looking out at the same dark fields, knowing that whatever came next would have to be built from scratch. And that building from scratch is slower and harder and more honest than pretending the old thing still works. January came in gray and biting the way it always does in Southwest Ohio. No drama, just cold that settles into the ground and stays. Kevin started at the Delphi manufacturing plant in Kettering on the 6th. Assembly line work, second shift available, but he took days. $22 an hour, no travel, home by 5:30 every evening. The pay cut from the pipeline was $14 an hour and we both felt it immediately. I sat at the kitchen table the second week of January and redid our budget on the same yellow legal pad I'd used for a very different kind of math back in December. The numbers were tight. Tight in the way that means you pick between new brake pads and the dentist, not between luxuries. We refinanced the mortgage without Doris's name on it. That took 3 weeks of paperwork and a closing fee we put on a credit card. And the monthly payment dropped by $180, but stretched to 30 years, which meant we'd be paying for this house until I was 68. I picked up a fourth afternoon at Gary's plumbing company. Gary didn't ask why. He just adjusted the schedule and left a candy bar on my desk the first Monday, which is the most Gary thing in the world. But Kevin was home. That was the part the spreadsheet couldn't capture. He picked Lily up from school on Wednesdays, his short day, and the first time he did it she came through the front door with an expression I hadn't seen in months. Not happiness exactly. Surprise. The good kind, the kind that comes from something you'd stopped expecting. He learned to braid her hair from a YouTube tutorial on his phone, sitting on the couch with Lily on the floor between his knees, both of them squinting at the screen. He got it wrong 3 times. The fourth attempt produced something lopsided but intact, and Lily looked in the bathroom mirror and said, "It's not bad, Daddy." Kevin beamed like he'd welded a perfect seam. These were small things. I know that. But I'd spent 12 years learning that small things, lunchbox notes, pill organizers, 5:15 alarms, are the bricks that everything else is built on. One evening in late January, I came out of the kitchen and found him reading to Lily on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his voice doing different characters for the talking animals. I leaned against the doorframe and felt something shift in my chest. Not love, not yet, but the space where love used to live opening back up. Airy out. Like a room where someone finally cracked a window. February. Couples counseling. Dr. Elaine Pryor's office was above a chiropractor's clinic on Far Hills Avenue, in a building that smelled like eucalyptus and old carpet. 2 armchairs facing each other, a box of tissues on the table between them that neither of us touched for the first 3 sessions. Those early weeks were brutal in a quiet way. Not yelling, not accusations, just 2 people sitting 4 feet apart trying to find the words for damage that had been accumulating since before we knew it was there. The first 15 minutes of each session nobody spoke. Kevin stared at the carpet. I stared at the window. Dr. Pryor waited. The 4th session Kevin talked about Earl. First time he'd said his father's name without flinching since Christmas. "I thought he was the best man I knew," he said, and his voice cracked on new like a branch that's been holding weight too long. I built my whole idea of what a man's supposed to be on a guy who was lying to everybody in his life. And now I look at my own marriage and I think, what parts of me are him? What did I learn from a man who could do that? I reached across the gap between our chairs and took his hand. He gripped it like I was pulling him out of something. In the 5th session I said the thing I'd been carrying since long before Thanksgiving. "I stopped trusting you years ago. I just didn't have a word for it because you weren't doing anything wrong. You were just never here. And, gone, doesn't feel like a betrayal until you realize it is one." Dr. Pryor said that was progress. I wasn't convinced. But I came back the next Wednesday and so did Kevin, and I figured that showing up was its own kind of answer. Courtney and Dale's divorce finalized in March. Quick and ugly, Dale took the settlement and moved back to Richmond, Indiana to be near his parents. He called Kevin once, the only time they'd spoken since everything broke open. Kevin put it on speaker because his hands were shaking too bad to hold the phone steady. Dale's voice was calm, almost gentle. I'm not mad at your wife. She told me a truth I had a right to know. Courtney didn't give me that respect in 14 years of marriage. Kevin said, I'm sorry, Dale. Dale said, yeah. Me too. And that was it. Courtney kept the house but lost the Yukon in the settlement and most of the savings. She didn't call me. Didn't write. Didn't send a message through Kevin or anyone else. Doris stopped speaking to both of us, but she also stopped speaking to Courtney, which meant that farmhouse outside Brookville went from the center of the Whalen universe to a place where one woman sat alone in a dead man's recliner watching a television she hadn't turned on. Uncle Ray told Kevin, she's not doing good, Kev. She just sits there. Kevin didn't visit for 6 weeks. When he finally drove out, Doris met him at the door and said, I was trying to keep this family together. Kevin looked at her, his mother 70 years old standing in the doorway of a house built on silence, and said, you were keeping a lie together, Mom. That's not the same thing. The hardest piece of all of this, harder than the money, harder than the counseling, harder than the look on Kevin's face when he read that DNA report, was Bryce. 14 years old. Parents divorcing. Father gone to Indiana. Nobody telling him why. I raised it in counseling on a Tuesday in March. Somebody has to tell that boy. He's going to figure it out on his own, or some kid at school is going to say something, and it'll be Thanksgiving all over again for a different child. Kevin agreed but couldn't figure out how. So I did something I never expected to do. I picked up my phone and called Courtney. First time since November. My hands were steady. The call lasted 4 minutes. I'm not calling to fight, I said. I'm calling about Bryce. He deserves the truth told gently by someone who loves him. If you won't do it, I will, not to hurt you but because I know what it looks like when a kid's identity gets ripped away at a dinner table, and I won't let that happen to him. Silence. Long enough that I could hear her breathing. Then, I'll do it. But not yet. Soon, Courtney. He's already asking questions. She hung up. I set the phone down and realized my hands were shaking now. Not from anger but from the weight of extending something to a woman who'd never extended anything to me. Dogwoods blooming along Route 49, white and pink against a sky that was finally remembering how to be blue. The fields outside Brookville greening up in that tentative early spring way, like Ohio was testing whether winter was really done before committing. I was driving my bus route. Same roads, same stops, same kids hauling themselves up the steps with their backpacks and their sleepy faces. But something was different in the way I held the wheel. Lighter. Not because everything was fixed. The mortgage was still tight. Kevin and I were still learning how to be in the same room without the ghost of his father between us. Doris was a silence I might never fill. And Courtney was a scar I hadn't decided whether to let heal or let harden. But lighter because the thing I'd been carrying for a decade. The need to prove I belonged. The need to earn a place at a table that was never going to make room for me. I'd set it down. Not gently. I dropped it on the floor of that family and walked away, and the crash had broken things that needed breaking. That evening I picked Lily up and we stopped at the park near Englewood Dam. She ran straight for the swings, pumping her legs until she was higher than the crossbar, her curly hair flying behind her like something wild and free and completely unmistakably hers. She shouted across the park, "Mama, watch this." He jumped. Launched herself off the swing at its highest point, sailed through the air for 1 perfect second, and landed in the wood chips with both feet. Thud. Steady. She spun around, arms out, grinning so wide I could see the gap where her left molar used to be. "Did you see?" I smiled. "A real one. The kind that doesn't start on your face. It starts somewhere behind your ribs, in the place where you keep the things that matter most." "I saw, baby. I see you." If this story hit close to home, subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. What would you have done differently? Tell me in the comments.